with my best friend and my little sister. My little sister, as we're walking up the road, turns to us and says, "Brian's gross." I just froze and immediately blurted out, "He's doing it to you too?" For the next 4 hours, we sat on our trampoline. She told me one incident after another about he had been sexually abusing her and silencing her too. Oh, I was filled with so much anger and rage. Here I was staying silent, and he had the nerve to be doing it to my little sister too. Well, there was one positive thing with my sister coming forward. 2 against 1. Somebody has to believe us. I told my sister we have to tell somebody. And even as that little 13-year-old knew that this was going to change our family's lives forever. Our relationship with our aunts, uncles, everything will never be the same. The next day we told our parents, and as you can imagine, as any mother or father finding this out, we're devastated. How did we miss the signs? How did this go on just down the hallway during Christmas, Thanksgiving, these holidays that we gather? Well, my parents were trying to work with my aunt and uncle. My father that night, when they found out, walked over to his sister's house, told my aunt what her son had been doing. And with that, my aunt said, "We'll talk to him." Well, 2 days later, my aunt and uncle call back and say, "He's denying it, he's saying the girls are liars, and his parents are believing them." My mom asked my aunt to keep it between the family. Don't get, between the 2 families, don't tell the other relatives, the grandparents. Let's work this out together. Well, my aunt didn't do that. She told all of our large extended family. And guess what? They took the perpetrator's side. All calling my sister and I liars, did not want to believe that my cousin had done this. Denial set in immediately. My parents continued to try to get my aunt and uncle to work with them. Continue to try to, what they wanted was to give their son psychological help. That's what my parents wanted for them. They weren't looking to see him locked away. They were looking to see that he never did this to another child again. But they weren't working with him. After 2 meetings of sitting down together, my parents had no choice. They went to the authorities. They went to the police. And it was at the police department where we were referred to the Children's Advocacy Center in my community. And it's because of that Children's Advocacy Center that I'm standing here today. You see, I was afraid to talk about this. I feared walking into those doors that these people were looking to see if I was telling the truth. Going to call me a liar, not believe me like my cousin had told me. Walked into this very cheerful, colorful place with stuffed animals all over the place. Very nice people. Led down to a hallway into this little room where I began talking about my friends, school, and eventually started talking about why I was there. One incident after another of how my cousin had abused me. But you see, they never asked me in that interview, "Erin, has anybody else ever done this to you?" Because I was not about to talk about it. I saw how devastated my mother was when I came forward with what our cousin did. There was no way I could tell her, well, that's why when I was 6, 7, and 8, somebody else was doing it. And that wasn't haunting me. My cousin was. So I kept that a secret and continued to keep that a secret. After our interview, the next day, my cousin was called in to the police department. He had been denying it for an entire month. But believe it or not, the police got a confession. After they went from one incident after another, they put him under arrest. Of course, when they walked out and told his parents that their son had confessed, my aunt, still in denial, said you forced him into something he did not do. And to this day, she still does not believe her son did this, and my sister and I made it all up, even with the confession. It's sad, because I know if this had happened to my son, if I was in her shoes, I would want more than anything in the world to get my son the help that he needs, to find out if someone had done this to him and he is doing what somebody did to him. But that's not the path they took. Now we have the option, do we take it to trial? Or we go the route we originally wanted and not take it to trial, but we know he will get the help that he needs. Well, police, detectives, everyone warned my parents, your girls are going to have to testify against their cousin. They're going to ask them questions like, Erin, why didn't you tell after the first time? Why did you let this go on for so long? Well, that scared my parents. They feared it was secondary abuse, more trauma towards my sister and I. Thinking back to it, I really wish I did have that opportunity to face him in court. court and tell him how I truly feel and let him hear that voice that he had tried to silence. But we went the other route. He was screened through juvenile court. He was given 7 years probation, 2 years in a sex offender treatment program. He couldn't come within 100 feet of my sister and I, and 1,000 hours of community service. We were satisfied. Now it was time to move on with our lives. We were no longer attending those family gatherings with that large extended family. You see, they, as I said, did not want to believe this. They went as far as that cop who walked into the room just as my cousin was about to abuse me. After my cousin confessed, he went and called the detective, who my cousin confessed to, and said, using his authority as a cop, let's sweep this all under the rug. Let's pretend he didn't confess. Don't charge him. My grandfather was calling the police department, trying to get the charges dropped. It was disgusting how this family was protecting the perpetrator. It didn't make sense to me. Here I thought we would have the support, and that's not what we were getting. But I was fortunate to have 2 parents, a mother and father, that did believe their child, did believe both their girls. Because so often when kids come forward, the moms sit there and don't want to believe it. They want to sit there and say, your father would never do this, your stepfather would never do this. And what I tell every single kid who comes to me and says, Erin, I did tell somebody, but my mother says I'll be put in foster care. Our lives will be ripped apart if I tell anybody about this. I tell those kids, you need to tell somebody else. You need to find that school social worker. You need to find that teacher. You need to find that other trusted adult in your life and tell. Yes, your life might be disrupted for a while, but wouldn't it be far better to be placed somewhere else, in a grandparent's home, in a relative's home, than have to continue to live the horror that you're enduring? And in the big picture, you're saving other children from being abused. Children end up being the heroes when they put their perpetrators behind bars. When they expose what their perpetrators have done, they're protecting other children. They're no longer living in this darkness, but putting a bright light on who this person is and their actions. So as we continue to move forward with our lives, we later found out my aunt fought with the Illinois State's Attorney. Well, the Illinois State's Attorney wasn't behind that 2-way mirror and heard one incident after another of what had gone on for nearly 2 years. She's only seeing in front of her 3 counts of sexual abuse before they put my cousin under arrest. She's seeing no prior things on his record of this 16-year-old. So she agrees to reduce the charges at 7 months down to 6 months, or at 7 years down to 6 months of probation. He no longer had to do a sex offender treatment program for 2 years. Instead, my aunt just had to find a private therapist who had to write a letter and submit it to the state's attorney that he got help. Well, the state's attorney, here it was now October. In May is when he was arrested. Here it's now October, and she's already got the letter in front of her. She reads it to my mom, and it's from the therapist saying, I met with Brian a few times. He admits his wrongdoing and says he will never repeat this behavior. Well, I'm sorry, a few times are not going to change a man that did such horrific things to my sister and I. And I didn't want to see him left behind bars. I wanted more than anything for this man never to hurt another child again. Because I know what it does to a child's life. Scars them for the rest of their lives. Suddenly, as I'm going off now to junior high and high school, it's now haunting me all the time. I'm having nightmares, I'm having flashbacks. Only of my cousin, because I haven't talked about what happened in 6, 7, 8. Haunting me constantly. I don't know how to talk about this. My sister and I were put in groups with other girls at the Children's Advocacy Center. That was one of the best things in my healing because my best friends couldn't relate with me, but there were other girls that understood what I was going through. They experienced the same thing with somebody else. They understood it. So they understood the nightmares. This doesn't want to stay on. They understood the nightmares, the flashbacks. They understood it. So with them, I could relate. I could talk to them. And that was one of the best things as part of my healing journey with my sister. Well, suddenly now when I'm in high school, it is haunting me daily. I don't want my mom or dad to see what I'm going through because I watched my mother cry for nearly 2 nights when she heard about this. feeling like she had failed as a parent, carrying all this guilt and blame that she did something wrong. So suddenly while I'm in high school, having all these nightmarish flashbacks, I could be sitting there taking a math test. Suddenly in the middle of that math test, I'm flashing back to being locked in a closet with my cousin. Suddenly I'm out with all my friends at lunch. Suddenly I'm flashing back to being held down on a bed with my cousin. Well, finally got to a point where one day I was at our lake house and saw my cousin walking down the pier right towards me. I'm suddenly flashing back to a moment where he was abusing me. And I remember reading in a teen magazine once about how this girl had used razor blades on her wrists to numb the pain that she was going through. And I thought to myself, well, maybe that'll stop the flashbacks. Well, it ended up being a very, very, very destructive and unhealthy coping mechanism I would go down. Suddenly, I began cutting every time I had a flashback. The physical pain was far more bearable than the emotional pain that I was enduring. It always snapped me back into reality. I'm no longer living in that past. Brought me back to the present. But of course, it's very unhealthy. And soon, shortly thereafter, about 5-6 months, my best friend finds out about it. When the long sleeves that I always wore were pulled up a little, she grabbed my hand and said, "What are you doing?" Well, she went to the school psychologist the next day. Well, of course, the school psychologist is calling my mother in. My mother finds out. Soon, I'm seeing private therapists outside school. Soon, they're drugging me up with a psychiatrist with antidepressants, sleep medication, anxiety medication. Taking all these pills just to function every day. Well, one day, sitting there with that therapist, she goes, "Why don't you try writing a letter? Write a letter to what you want to say to your cousin. Rip it out, burn it, bring it in here and read it to me. It might help you get this out." So I'll never forget that night, that April 30th, 2003, 10 years ago. Sitting there in front of my computer and just start writing out that entire letter. That letter to my cousin of what I wanted to say to him, what I wanted him to hear. 5-page letter. And just before midnight, I thought to myself, I'm not going to rip this out. I'm not going to burn this. I want him to hear it. He's now away at college. I start to do a little Google search, find his college email address. Suddenly, I'm cutting and pasting this into an email. I'll never forget, just before midnight, hitting send. I never in a million years expected a response back, because it was a very angry, hate-filled letter towards him. But 3 days later, I got a response. And for the next 7 months, I corresponded back and forth with my cousin in letters, wanting answers, wanting to hold him accountable, wanting him to understand what he had done to me in my life, how it affected me, and how he may have never been held accountable when he was younger and got the help that he needed, that one day justice will be served. For the longest time, I just spewed so much anger and hatred towards him. I told him in some of these letters that I wanted to push him off cliffs, feed him to bears, suffocate him in garbage bags, anything, because I had so much anger and hatred towards this man. But then I came to this realization. Every day I stayed angry towards my cousin. I was letting him steal another moment of my joy and happiness. I was giving him another day of my life. Every day I stayed angry with him. Suddenly, my senior year of high school, 7 months after corresponding, I received a letter from him asking for forgiveness, apologizing. "Erin, I'm sorry. Sorry for what I've done. I acted out on behalf of just plain stupidity and an urge of sexuality." Reading this letter, I realized I can't hate him anymore. It's not healthy. And by forgiving my cousin as that senior in high school, it opened up these doors and led me to the freedom I have been looking for. Suddenly all that anger and hatred lifted. Suddenly all that joy and happiness that I had not felt in years came flooding back to me. And I decided, the girl that wouldn't talk about this even to a therapist because it was too uncomfortable of a topic, didn't want to tell her about all the dirty things that happened. I decided I wanted to put a face and voice on this. So I ended up taking that little pink diary that was once locked away, hidden under a mattress for nobody to find, and decided that senior in high school, after doing some research, seeing the statistics, 1 in 4 girls, 1 in 6 boys will be sexually abused before their 18th birthday, I decided as a senior in high school to turn it into a book called Stolen Innocence. Because that's what happened. My innocence had been stolen. My trust had been taken. But the one thing I was able to get back from my perpetrators was my voice. And I wanted that voice to be heard. I wanted that voice to reach every other victim that has not found their voice, to break your silence. Reclaim your voice and be heard. Don't give that perpetrator another day of your life. It's not worth it. So as soon as that senior in high school began traveling around the country, appearing on a whole bunch of national talk shows, Good Morning America, Oprah, CNN. A month ago I was on Katie Couric, talking about this important topic. As I said, we look the other way, pretend it's not going on. But I'm not going to let people pretend it's not going on. I'm determined to put a face and voice on this silent epidemic. Well, you see, after writing that book, went off to college, got my master's degree in social work. As I'm getting my master's degree in social work, still continuing to speak on this, I began writing a second book, a book I wanted people to understand about healing. Healing your life and moving forward when you've been abused. The title I give it, Living for Today. And it's in Living for Today that I finally faced that chapter of my life as a little 5, 6, 7, 8-year-old. You see, as I often tell people, if you think the abuse you've endured in your life will never affect you, it will. One day it will be all back in your face again, having to face it. I tell that 14-year-old, you need to talk about it now because I don't want you to be that 30-year-old. Finally coming to terms with what happened to you, because suddenly now it's all up in your face, haunting you. So I finally broke my silence in this book about what happened when I was that little girl. Well, they went after that man, no longer living in the community by me. He's now living a half an hour away. And guess what? He's still living with Ashley and her mother. This time down in the basement of the house. The mom is now remarried and has an 8-year-old daughter. Well, of course, when the police show up to speak with him, Ashley answers the door. She tells him he's sleeping. He describes why he's there. Well, we later find out from the little 8-year-old when she comes running to her mother when her mother comes home from work, telling her that a detective, police had been at the house. As Ashley's describing, I didn't want to wake him up. You know, I got his number, I got his card, I'll let him know he has to call, a detective wants to speak to him. Well, that little 8-year-old says he wasn't sleeping. I saw him standing at the bottom of the stairs listening to the detective the entire time. Well, that gave him a little red flag. Oh no, that secret that he wanted me to keep that I had been keeping for the past 16 years. He's finally having to face it. I'm no longer that silent little kid anymore. Well, his sister, Ashley's mother, believed me 100%, and still does to this day. She confronted her brother that night. He blew it off and said, I don't even know any errands. I don't know what you're talking about. She kicked him out the very next day. Does not speak to her brother to this day. Police went after him for months, trying to just get him into an interrogation room and speak to him. But he refused. He was jumping from his mother's house, another relative's house, from Chicago to the suburbs. For several months, I was just getting simple updates. Erin, we have not spoken to him yet. We're trying. We can't get him to talk. We can't get him on the phone. We can't, connect with him. Finally, after several months, I got a phone call. The detective told me, Erin, he's pled the fifth. He's not going to speak to us. Of course, if he's not going to talk, they're never going to get it out of him. They're never going to get a confession. So he told me the only way we can ever put this man behind bars is if more victims come forward. We don't have a strong enough case. Don't have a strong enough case to charge this man. Well, Ashley, during this whole time, didn't want to talk about it. It wasn't until later, after I published Living for Today, that she came to me, asked me to come over a year later, telling me that This was all haunting her now. That the reason she thought this was normal, what her uncle did, is because an uncle on the other side of the family was doing the same exact thing to her, all the way up until she was a senior in high school. She's not talking about it. As I said, she's just getting the message from these perpetrators, you keep this a secret. Well, she's now been in counseling for years, and as her mother says, she has so many issues, and she's afraid to press charges against her uncle. But she has reached out to the detective, and she says to me, Erin, we have until we're 38 years old. You get 20 years in the state of Illinois to bring charges against your perpetrator. We're still trying to track down that friend of hers. That friend that I had just met that one time. I don't even know her name. They're still trying to figure out who that girl was. Well, I ended up realizing as I went down this journey, putting a face and voice on this, I thought my only mission in life was to give children and adults a voice. But then I was looking back one day at my little childhood diary, and I read something that popped out at me. I sobbed the whole way home. Over and over in my head, I thought about what had just happened. In school, a guy called Officer Friendly teaches us about stranger danger. Never answer the door when my parents are gone. I thought people, like my cousin Brian, jumped out of bushes and attacked you at night. I was never warned about my own family. They don't teach you that in school. It was reading that I realized that we needed to do something about this. As I say, we teach kids tornado drills, bus drills, spider drills. Guarantee every single one of you do these drills every year in school. You learn all of this. Every year it's mandated in Illinois that we do the tornado drills, that we do the bus drills, the fire drills. I knew how to run out of a burning building. I knew how to duck and cover from a tornado. I knew how to evacuate a school bus. But when I was being sexually abused, I didn't know how to speak up and tell. 6th grade, not sure if you guys do this, but I know 80% of the country does. We had DARE. DARE taught us, on the back of this card, the 8 ways to say no to drugs. The DARE officer came in for 6 weeks, teaching us drugs and alcohol are bad. Don't ever do them. They're illegal. So in high school, when I was approached with marijuana, I knew to say no. In college, when I was approached with these drugs, I knew to say no. I can stand here clearly today and tell every single one of you, I have not so much as put a cigarette in my mouth because I knew it was bad for you. But I never knew how to speak up and tell. So I decided to go after a law in my state of Illinois, requiring that every public school teach kids on safe touch, unsafe touch, safe secrets, unsafe secrets. Empowering kids if you're being sexually abused, you tell somebody. You don't keep this a secret. Because often the abuse will continue to happen until you tell somebody. And that was my mission, requiring that we teach kids, that we give kids a voice. We take back the power and control these sex offenders have on children. Because as you look at the Penn State case, look at how many children were abused. And the adults that knew this had happened to one child, but didn't go to the authorities, had that little boy that had been abused in the shower, had known and had been educated to speak up and tell. Look at how many other little boys could have been saved. As I said, we need to empower kids with a voice. So I went on this crusade, testifying 4 times at my state capitol in Illinois in front of lawmakers. Erin's law passed. It got passed in Illinois, but I realized there are not just children being abused in Illinois. They're being abused across this world. Just right here alone in Scott City, a small community of yours, you have 14 registered sex offenders. That's a lot for a small community. And the sad thing is, those are just the 14 we know about. What about all the Bryans? What about all the uncles of, like Ashley's uncle, that are out there that have never been convicted? They're around us, and they are the people you often love and trust. So that's why I realized I'm taking this crusade national, going state to state to get this passed. State to state to give every child a voice, an opportunity to not keep this a secret, taking away the power and control sex offenders have on kids, and giving kids a voice. I went on to get it passed in Missouri, then Indiana, then Maine, then Michigan, Mississippi, Arkansas signed it last week. Testified in Nevada last month, and it's on its way of being passed. Connecticut will sign it into law in May, in this month, at the end of the month. I have currently 7 states that have passed this law, and 10 more introducing it. And I will not stop until all 50 states have given kids a voice with this law, giving kids the opportunity to speak up and tell. And I am determined. And as I often tell everybody, if there's anything you're passionate about, if there's anything you want to accomplish in life, as long as you have the determination to get it done, nothing is impossible. You can accomplish anything you set your mind to. And that's what I'm doing with my life. I'm going out there determined, guarantee every single one of you, you will one day hear about this law being passed in every single state. Now we just need to get Kansas on board. I've been writing legislators, your senators, your representatives. I have been writing them, trying to get them to pass this law, to introduce it in your state. I am willing to go to all these states and testify before lawmakers. And you'd be surprised, the legislators, after hearing me testify, who break down and cry and say, I was a victim. I was abused by my father. I want all of you to support this law. It happens all of the time. Just last month, I brought 3 legislators in Arkansas to tears because of my message and them realizing that yes, we need to give kids a voice. So I encourage all of you in this room, since we don't have Kansas on board, to write your legislators. Pull out that pen and paper, look up their address, write them and tell them about Erin's law, a law that will require sexual abuse prevention in schools. How many of you, by a show of hands, were ever educated in your schools on sexual abuse prevention? 1, maybe 2 hands are going up right now. It's a sad, sad reality. How many of you, by a show of hands, were taught about stranger danger? Do you get my point? But 93% of the time, you're not being hurt by strangers. It's the people you love and trust. Back in October, I was contacted by Glamour magazine. They reached out to me and told me I had been selected as Woman of the Year. I was taken to Carnegie Hall in New York City in front of 3,000 people, recognized. I got to pick any celebrity I wanted to hand me my acceptance award. I got up there and gave an acceptance speech, talking in front of tons of legislators, kids up in the balcony, all of these celebrities, from Ethan Hawke, an actor sitting in front of me, Mary J. Blige next to him. So all these different well-known people at this event and bringing awareness to Erin's law. The magazine did this wonderful article all on Erin's law and my mission to get it passed in all 50 states. That night, we had a whole VIP dinner. I had Tyra Banks coming up to me, telling me how motivated she was by Erin's law. I had Philip Phillips come up to me, who won American Idol last year, telling me that he totally supports my law. Don't know if any of you watched the Summer Olympics, but I sat there in the makeup room getting my hair and makeup done with all of your well-known Summer Olympic girls that were also being honored that night. Little Gabby Douglas, Missy Franklin, all these people that they were being recognized for their gold medals for Women of the Year. There was 10 people selected. Selena Gomez was there. Well, she wasn't very happy because Justin Bieber had just broken up with her, so she was having a rough night. But you know what? It wasn't about the recognition. Because you see, I never went after this law to be recognized for what I'm doing across this country. Why I go after this law is for that little 7-year-old that is being sexually abused tonight by that stepfather, who is not being educated, who's going to continue for the next several years be sexually abused by that stepfather because nobody's educating her. And she's not going to face that abuse until she's 30 years old in drug rehab because the drugs she used to numb the pain that she never dealt with. Finally looking her mother in the eyes and telling her what happened to her by the man she married. I want that little 7-year-old to go to school the next day and report to her teacher, her school social worker, her aunt, what had happened. Put the abuse to a stop and never be abused again. That is my mission. You see, my innocence was stolen, my trust was taken. But I have reclaimed my voice and turned a very painful event in my life into a purpose to go out there and educate students, just like you, to not keep this a secret. For all we know, there's one of you sitting in this room that has experienced this, that has never told a soul. And it is my hope that if you are in this room and this has happened to you, break your silence. Don't keep this a secret anymore. Stop this person from abusing you, and you will save many other children the horror. Because as you saw, both my perpetrators did not stop after one child. They abused as many as they could get away with. I thank you guys all for coming out here today and listening to my very important message. I hope you will reach out to your legislators. And I hope that if you ever come across that friend of yours that discloses, this happened to me, that you'll report it if they don't. You tell somebody. Yes, you might hurt that friendship for a while, but in the big picture, you're saving that person. You're saving that person from the horror I endured for 6.5 years of my life. Thank you guys all for being such an awesome audience. Questions for me, feel free to ask me. And you can also find my webpage, erinmerryn.net, or erinslaw.org. You can just type in Google, Erin Merryn. I answer emails, or you can go on, I know your age, social media is a big thing. You can find Erin's Law Facebook page, where I continue to update where Erin's Law is going next and what state has passed it. Thank you guys again.